Okay, very good. Here we go. The recording has started. So, welcome to this webinar put on by the National Association of State Chief Information Officers and sponsored by the NASCIO Enterprise Architecture and Governance Committee and the Security and Privacy Committee. This webinar is supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance, a longtime partner with NASCIO in working in areas such as enterprise architecture, and we appreciate you being here. I want to lead off with just a little background on cyber disruption response planning. Our speakers today are Chris Christensen from the state of Michigan, David Geik from Connecticut, Sherry DeVoe from Connecticut, and I will be hosting our session here. I am Eric Sweden with NASCIO. So as this slide presents, we want to make you all aware that we are looking certainly at an increase in cyber threats. Cybersecurity has been on the annual state CIO top 10 list published by NASCIO since 2009. It's always been a priority for the state CIO, but since that first top 10 list was published, the frequency, magnitude, and sophistication of cyber attacks has continued to increase at an accelerated pace. The internet news is certainly full of reports on major cyber events every day, but the magnitude is expanding in terms of reach, number of citizens affected, value of intellectual capital, and national secrets stolen, the business impact on industry, banking, and healthcare. Some have labeled 2014 as the year everything doubled in terms of attacks, cyber crime, and cyber spending. The main message we want to bring to you today is it is absolutely essential for states to develop a cyber disruption response strategy, and operations need to be developed now. So in advance of a cyber event that would be of such a magnitude that it could be categorized as a cyber disruptions. So with that, we want to provide this webinar and several reports that are forthcoming on the topic of cyber disruption. This graph shows you a little bit about the increasing nature in terms of types of attacks and the magnitude. This slide here comes from our Deloitte NASCIO survey of cybersecurity across the country. And what we want to see is more capabilities in the way of cyber threat analysis so that we can be prepared in advance. We know it's coming over the horizon. And clearly, as you look at these statistics, we've got a ways to go. So forthcoming as well in October, that's Cybersecurity Month, we've got a number of publications that are going to be relevant to people on this call. We will be publishing guidance on cyber disruption response planning and implementation, as well as advanced cyber analytics. We'll be publishing a toolkit for state CISOs, and then also our annual CIO survey, which is going to touch a number of topics that will be of relevance to you. So with that, I want to introduce our speakers again, Chris from Michigan, David and Sherry from Connecticut. And we're going to lead off here with a couple of polling questions. So what we'd like you to do is respond to this poll. The first thing we're going to talk about is do you have a cyber disruption response plan? So there is the survey. Please respond to this, and let's look at what the stats look like. All right, we're going to go ahead and end this poll, and I'm going to broadcast the results. This is what we're seeing. Chris, David, Sherry, can you see those results?
We can.
Good. 56% say yes. 39% are saying we're planning to develop one. Let's move on to our second question, and that is related to tabletop exercises. So we're going to open this and try to learn, you know, how frequently are you testing that plan? So here we go. within the last 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, etc. Okay, the numbers are stabilized here. Let's go ahead and end that poll, and we'll broadcast it. And there you see the results. Chris and David and Sherry, do you see those results?
Yeah, I can see them.
Okay, so 30% have tested their cyber disruption plan in the last 6 months, 26 within the last 12 months, 17 in the last 24 months. So that gives us an idea how active these plans are. All right, very good. Thank you all for participating in those questions. With that, Chris, I want to turn it over to you to talk about cyber disruption planning in the state of Michigan. Thanks for being here, Chris.
All right, thanks, Eric, and thanks to everybody that's on the call today for taking time out of their day to be able to participate. I found it interesting that 56% of the people that are on the call have a plan. Perhaps these are the individuals that are, most worried about it, and that's good, but I think it's interesting about how we can try to provide more attention to something of this nature of having a cyber plan. So in the state of Michigan, we have developed a cybersecurity plan, but we had a strategy first. So I just want to go over a little bit about what the state of Michigan has done, why we needed to have a plan. I think everybody is aware that it's not any longer if you get hacked, it's when you get hacked. I want to talk a little bit today about some of the key drivers, the external and internal reasons of why we were trying to develop something, and also the methodology that we've adopted, some of the key outputs that we have, challenges that we encountered, lessons learned, and then looking forward. So at the federal level, we know that there's plenty of things that are always going on, and with the OPM hack that's now, I think, up to 21.5 million records that's been taken, it's very alarming. I recently read that there were 5.6 million people's fingerprints that were taken and compromised with that hack as well. So we know that these things are happening and they're going on all the time. The American Airlines issue was originally a network connectivity issue, and now they're at least acknowledging that there were some cyber issues going on with that. I don't know if they're full on saying it was a cyber attack or not yet, but we know that there's some other things there. So at the federal level, they're giving us some good direction on that we do need something, that something would be helpful because they know that these things are going to be happening. So here is some of the drivers of why we were putting together a plan. These are like the business drivers for what we were doing. These are things that have been said at the federal level, the directives of why and how we should try to shape a plan to be able to make sure that we're protecting our critical infrastructure. This is also a little bit more close home to Michigan. Fortunately for Michigan, we have a governor who understands IT and who knows cyber. So when he was elected in 2011, Governor Steiner introduced the Michigan Cyber Initiatives, wanting and desiring to make Michigan a leader in cybersecurity. He was very proactive with cybersecurity, and in fact, he developed the cyber defense with the Michigan Cyber Command Center, the Michigan Cyber Range, and the Michigan Cyber Civilian Corps, because he knows that something could happen, and he wants to make sure that we're going to be prepared. So in Michigan, we originally created the Cyber Disruption Response Strategy that was published in September of 2013. Now, we're going to have the Cyber Disruption Response Plan that will be available at the North American International Cyber Summit on October 25th and 26th in Detroit. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of these. As Eric was saying earlier on, breaches are happening all the time. People are attacking. The two that I really like on this slide is that by the time you hear the thunder, it's too late to build the ark, where 56% of you had already started to have a plan. I think that's great, and I think we can make sure that we have the plans in place that we're going to need. The other quote that I really like here is that there are two kinds of big companies in the United States, those who have been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked. I think that's kind of funny, but it's very true. All right, so just a little bit more about what we're trying to do in Michigan. So if we have an emergency that happens, when we have a full-on cyber emergency, the State Emergency Operations Center will be activated. And they have, at the State Emergency Operations Center, they have the way in which they're organized is through the incident command system. So we have one person who will be the leader of the organization to make sure things are getting done. The governor has given this individual the authority to be able to act, to organize everyone to be able to get things up and running and to be taken care of. What we were able to do with our plan is to orchestrate so that the Cyber Disruption Response Team will work side by side with the State Emergency Operations Center to take care of the logistical, the financial roles, and the operational issues that need to be taken care of. Just a little bit more about the breach frequency. One of the things I find interesting here is that there were fewer identities were reportedly exposed in 2014, in part due to fewer companies reporting this metrics when disclosing that a breach took place. This could indicate that many breaches, perhaps the majority, are going unreported or undetected. So people, even maybe with the American Airlines one, they weren't necessarily wanting to come right out and say that this had happened because perhaps they weren't completely prepared of what to do and the ramifications if they actually admitted that there was some cyber issues going on. So in Michigan, what we've done is we have our strategy and we want to make it better. So we've taken a 4-month process to be able to collect insight and get information from key stakeholders. So the Michigan State Police, the National Guard, our private and public partners that would include like DTE Energy, Kent County, Lansing Board of Water and Light, University of Michigan, Michigan State University. We leveraged the experience of a large security company, incident response personnel, to help get our data and to help write the plan. We would use individual and joint meetings with stakeholders to discuss and make sure that we had correct principles in place to know when we needed to contact each other and to make sure that we knew when to bring each other in. We based this on a federal and state best practices to try to make this so that we have the best practices in cybersecurity. And then also, we want to make sure that we're going to be able to do a tabletop to make sure that this is viable and this is real. So on October 9th, we have a tabletop exercise where we'll be involving the National Guard, Michigan State Police, and other key people around the area to make sure that this is a plan that will be viable for any and all issues that can happen. This slide, I wanted to make sure, obviously the best way to, if we can protect ourselves from everything, that's what we want to do, but unfortunately we know that somewhere down the line something bad could go wrong. And in Michigan, this is kind of the chart of how things happen. We want to try to catch things early, but if we don't, how does it escalate? So with the Department of Technology and Management and Budget, if we find an issue or if we see something, we're going to contact the MIOC or the MIOC, the Michigan Intelligence Operations Center. And depending on how severe this is, they're going to contact the Michigan Cyber Command Center, which is the MC3. The MC3 Center has professionals who are highly trained in emergency response to cyber events, and they have a rapid response team that can be deployed to be able to help out in any cyber incident. If it's significantly severe, we will involve the State Emergency Operations Center, and also the MC3 is involved again here so that we can make sure that we mitigate and recover the information that we're going to need to try to get back and make sure that the systems are all running well. So the key outputs of our plan, we were trying to get a comprehensive plan to coordinate the response to a cyber incident. We wanted to coordinate and communication annex for streamlined emergency communications between multiple agencies and public and private partners. We also wanted to define the roles and responsibilities of the entities. One of the things that I found interesting about this was originally when we had developed the cyber disruption strategy, the Department of Technology, Management, and Budget were the ones who wrote this plan. So when you asked the Michigan State Police if they were going to follow our plan, they were happy to follow it. However, we were the ones who had written the plan. So there were times where I would like to think that we tried to keep ourselves a little bit more involved than perhaps we should have, and we had to look at that to decide if that was needed for criminal activity. There were some of the things that we didn't need to be involved with, so we needed to make sure that we understood where our role and responsibilities were. We also wanted to make sure that we had preventative measures, that we would have an expedited detection and analysis of the issue, and we wanted to have a play-by-play instructions on key tasks and actions required to mitigate the damage and the spread of incident and to expedite remediation. With any type of plan that you have, if we don't use it and if we don't train on it, then it's not going to be effective. So we wanted to put into our plan a place where there will be continuing training, not only a yearly tabletop exercise, but more often than that, of continuing training about who is supposed to do what, and then making sure that we have the relationships with the Michigan State Police, with Homeland Security, with the National Guard, and with those individuals in whom we would need to call on when an incident does occur. We also wanted to make sure that we had a risk assessment and that we had a post-incident analysis. So some of the things that we have learned in developing a plan is to know and understand your cybersecurity ecosystem. This comes back to the part about who's in control and who should be in control. When there's criminal actions that are involved, we understand that Michigan State Police should probably be at the front of this to be able to help take care of things so that evidence isn't lost and so that we can properly track down the individuals in whom we're causing the problem. We also understand that communication and assumptions are your enemy. When we originally had completed our strategy, we thought that everybody would understand what a certain level of risk would be and what color it should be. So like if we had a DDoS attack, to somebody that might be a severe incident, to others it might just be a low-level incident. So we wanted to make sure that we had good communications to all and to have things defined and described very well. We also wanted to know and understand the formal and informal roles of those who needed to be involved. Again, this goes back to sometimes who wants to be involved versus who needs to be involved. We also wanted to facilitate and insist on input up front from the stakeholders in the plan creation as opposed to it coming in the 11th hour, which I must say it still is difficult because we're getting the plan ready for our tabletop exercise, and just a couple days ago I got a few emails from the National Guard asking if we could add a few things. I think that that's always going to happen, though. With any plan that you have, there's always going to want to be continuous improvement on the plan, so you'll want to make sure that you change it and you update it and you have a plan in place. Also, to assume the unforeseen impediments of scope creep. Sometimes we have a plan of what we want to do and it seems to cascade into other things. Leverage collaborative document sharing tools. Inside the cyber disruption plan, there's an area where if there is an incident, you pull out a piece of paper that's from there and it says, who's involved, what is the action, what's the organization status, and it goes through and you fill out it right on the piece of paper so that you have the same form that you're using from meeting to meeting so that you can say, this area is taken care of, we can go to another one. Once the tool is created, you have to implement it, practice it, validate it, and continually improve. All right, so just a little bit more about what we've been able to do in Michigan. As you see, these are our response levels from low, medium, high, severe, and then an emergency when the governor's contacted. I wanted just to share with you at least one of these so that you understand how well we've defined the incident and what we would do in that case. So if we went even to an orange incident or high, if we were just to ask somebody, what could be a high incident, maybe somebody would want to say that there was a DDoS attack that was affecting, several areas. But what we did is we went through and we defined specific things that would be able to be in the high level of activity, and I just wanted to share those with you. So the first one would be an exploit for a vulnerability that has a moderate level of damage, a compromise of a secure or critical systems, a compromise of a systems containing sensitive information or non-sensitive information. With that one, recently I was asked about a encrypted tape that was stolen from a data center. I think that's where that would fit in. More than one agency or entity affected in the state network with moderate level of impact, infected by malware that's spreading quickly throughout the internet with moderate impact. And then also a denial of service attack with moderate impact. So we go through and try to explain what type of activity would correlate into that area so that instead of just saying everything's going to be an emergency, we need to contact the governor, we try to make sure that we validate that this is actually what's happening and what we should do from here. So after we know that that's the level of the definition, we also have actions that we try to take and that we continue to monitor. We make sure that we contact the MSISAC for additional guidance and support. And then we have a great part in here where we talk about the communications between entities. So, for instance, on a high incident that's happened, this is where we would have the MSP would be talking with the State Emergency Operations Center and just putting them on notice and letting them know that something like this has happened. We also would have our CIO would contact the governor's office and let them know what's going on. And then our CTO would work with our public information officer if things were needing to be shared with the public about the incident that's going on. So we have a chain of who is supposed to be communicating with whom so that we don't have this miscommunication of who's telling the governor's office what's going on and who has the responsibility to making sure that other individuals are involved. We also have a clear line of when we bring in our public and private partners and involve the Cyber Civilian Corps so they can be able to help remediate the efforts that have already happened. Oh, sorry. So with that, that's what Michigan is being able to do with our cyber disruption plan, and I thank you for your time.
Okay, this is excuse me. This is David Gick from the state of Connecticut. Sherry DeBow here as well. For Connecticut, we come from a couple of different backgrounds. I had a mostly military background and came to the state about a year ago, a little over a year ago. Sherry's been with the state for a while and is also heavily involved in emergency management and incident response, both at the department level and at the statewide level. For Connecticut in particular, the idea of response to a cybersecurity incident is folded into an all hazards management system. In response to the H5N1 flu outbreak in 2007, the governor at that time, Governor Rell, passed an executive order, which has since been reinforced by Governor Malloy, whose proclamation is there, that all state agencies would be NIMS compliant. And I'll let Sherry take over to describe some of that. She's been involved with a lot of getting our planning and process into shape with that.
Yes, hi, Sherry DeVoe. Governor Malloy really had to hit the ground running after his inauguration because Connecticut got hit by a series of storms. So within months of Governor Malloy stepping in, he was made very well aware of the importance of response and communication during response throughout the state of Connecticut, whether it be cyber or a physical attack. So we are very strong in all hazards planning so that we can apply a framework to every type of response we might have to have. And during the work sessions in 2007 with Governor Rell, it was very important to both of these governors that all the executive branches follow these orders. There were many work sessions, training sessions, exercises that fortunately carry on through today. And we follow the National Incident Management System. We have Executive Order number 34, which you can find out there on our website, that enforces this, that asks all or mandates all agencies within the executive branch to be NIMS compliant. And that is very helpful because it really enables effective and efficient incident management. NIMS was actually brought to be after the 9/11 attacks and the hurricane seasons of 2004 and 2005. For first responders, many came to assist with the response to these emergencies, but nobody was talking the same language. It was very difficult to have an organized response when nobody was talking the same language. So the federal government came up with NIMS, and you can find their guide out on the website, on their website also, to help you understand a little bit more the background to what NIMS is. We're going to touch on it a little bit.
Right, and one thing to point out here is that we're focusing a lot on NIMS, and you'll notice some of the items in Governor Malloy's proclamation talking about incidents such as Sandy Hook and things like that, where cyber disruption is one of a series of incidents which would cause an interagency, state, federal, and local response, both public and private. And based on that, we look at cyber disruption as potentially the cause of the statewide incident, but it also might be the effect of other statewide incidents, such as major storms or environmental effects that could cause a bleeding into the cyber arena where you start to lose services or effective functions of the state government based on weather impacts on the infrastructure.
So the wonderful thing about NIMS is that it's a modular framework. We have the Incident Command System, ICS, underneath NIMS, and it really gives us a systematic approach for processes and methods for communication and response to whatever the situation might be. It's a top-down modular fashion based on the size and complexity of the incident. So you just activate the roles that you need. Chris had pointed out in one of his slides that you need to understand and know the roles of those that are going to be involved. NIMS and ICS provides that framework for you so that you do know who and what everybody has to do in response to make it a little bit easier in that time. So in Connecticut, to support Executive Order 34, the governor has the State Agency Training and Exercise Program, which we refer to as SATEP. That program, our plan, provides what the agencies need to know about this to ensure that we can be in compliance with the executive order. What we do here is we use HSEEP, which is the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, so that we can plan our exercises. It's basically a guide that helps us standardize the methodology and terminology connected with our exercise design, our development, conduct, evaluation, and to improve our planning process. And that's part of what Chris was pointing out to also. So you can make sure you cover everything when you have to have an exercise. It also outlines what our training goals are. We have some required training exercises and some elective. And I know a lot of folks definitely do the required. What's difficult to do in this is Homeland Security provides this training for free. Anybody can go out and take it online. The difficult part is you have to have your employees in the mindset that these are geared toward first responders. So sometimes it's difficult for somebody in IT to put their mindset that they're talking about a plane crash here, but what if the plane crashed, unfortunately, into a building where your main IT structure was? So you've got to make sure people are in that mindset, and that's a difficult transition for a lot of people. We sometimes still struggle with that, so we have point people that can help assist with those questions. It outlines our exercise goals, and we also have an annual statewide exercise. As a matter of fact, we're doing it this month, where the actual exercise for the municipalities who are included in this is a hurricane, but also due to some of the issues we've faced in the state, it also makes sure schools have security plans in place. Agencies also participate, and with HSEEP, they're able to create injects specific to their agency, so it really encompasses the whole state, right from municipalities, state agencies, NGOs are involved. We have some private businesses that participate along with our utility companies. So it is a very comprehensive exercise, and it gives everybody a chance to exercise their plans. So I know Chris talked about it a little bit. There's breaches, and then there's DDoS attacks or worms. We've had zero-day vulnerabilities where we've had to partially stand up our IMT, our incident management team, to start addressing it. Like Chris was saying, it could affect one agency, it could spread to multiple agencies, and then unfortunately it could become a statewide event. In that case, our governor, we would activate our Emergency Operations Center, and our governor, if necessary, would declare a state of emergency, which would then bring in all the necessary people so that we could function and respond to whatever the event might be. And with that, we have our state response framework. The link is there if you'd like to take a look at it. And what this does is it outlines the responsibilities of every agency. It just breaks it down by bullets of what each agency is responsible for, what some of the procedures are. It's higher level. Each agency then has their own plan to help support the state response framework to go into a little more detail of what their duties are. And I won't go too much into that because if you're interested, you can take a look at it on the web and see more detail.
The interesting part of having it part of a state response framework is that if we had a purely cyber incident like a DDoS or a zero-day vulnerability, exercising it through this framework makes other associated agencies who might not think about how much they depend on the IT infrastructure and what happens if statewide VPN connectivity goes away. What would happen if the state mainframe and the main data center went away, those kinds of impacts. So it's a way of having other associated agencies deal with the secondary and tertiary effects of potential cyber incidents.
So we've built a flow chart here to kind of walk us through and walk you through how our response works. And this has been modified for a cyber incident, but it definitely works the same way with a physical incident. And we've had a number of times where we've had zero-day vulnerabilities or DOS attacks where we stand up part of our IMT to respond. We talk amongst the technicians here. There's the incident commander who then can report to our agency heads as to what the situation is and brief them as to what our response plan is. And we stay in touch with the state agencies that need to be contacted with ourselves. The next phase would be if we're starting to see more of a state agency-wide issue with our cyber infrastructure. That's when we would bring in a State Emergency Operations Center and we would start building out that framework a little bit more. State agencies and DAS in our case would work through the EOC. There'd be unified command meetings where agency heads can speak with our Director of Emergency Management and our technical specialists to start determining if we need to expand on this event for our response. And then the last phase would be there is a lot of trouble. Whether it's a physical to cyber or cyber to physical, we could start talking about life safety issues here because certain parts of the infrastructure aren't available. At that point, our governor would declare a state of emergency. And that's where we would bring in the federal government, Homeland Security, and the municipalities would have a connection into the EOC. If they're starting to see effects of whatever the incident is in their areas, we could all communicate through a local point at our EOC. We make sure we're keeping all the state agency heads notified. We're keeping municipalities. Again, in that we have our NGOs and some private business, utilities, and we can get some information sharing going on at this point. MSISAC would definitely be involved as we are through a lot of any cyber incidents. I think most of the states do rely on MSISAC and the sister states to share that information about what might be going on. So in response to all the storms and the executive order that was given by both of our left governors, DAS Best has an incident management team, and we've had many activations. We've done our exercises, but we started the team in 2006, as we mentioned earlier, in response to the initial executive order. But then in 2009, we had lost a major transformer that fed the data center, and we had no street power coming in, and we had about a 24-hour period where we had to ensure our operations were running. It was too early yet to declare a disaster and move to our hot site, but at the same time, we had a major response in our hands. But due to our semi-annual exercises, our IT teams were able to respond to this. We stood up our IMT. It never made the newspaper, which is huge for anybody that works in state government knows. We were very successful because of our plans, because of our exercises, and because of the framework we were using with NIMS, that the constituents never knew that there was any issues with their technology. They were able to, all agencies were able to provide services. So that was a big win for us. We then had number of years where we had a couple of storms that didn't hit us too bad, but we did stand up to IMT in preparation in case the state was hit harder. And then unfortunately, in the fall of 2011 and again 2012, we were hit with back-to-back October storms that wreaked havoc in the state, where we had the northern part of the state got hit in the first one, the southern with Superstorm Sandy. We did have a lot of communication incidents, cell towers were going out, and because of that, we were able to address a lot of things, and our IMT was fully deployed and activated in response to all of that. And then we also had a couple of severe winter storms and a couple consecutive years after that. And these weren't cyber-specific events, but there were requirements for us to provide that framework and that our IT services to our other agencies that did have to provide physical response to the storm damages. As we began to grow with our cyber planning and response, we participated in 2012 with a national level exercise for Region 1. It was a great experience for all of us that participated in the year or so of planning beforehand, and the technicians that were able to exercise it. It was a 3-day exercise, and Connecticut expanded upon that with a total loss of all communications on the last day. And we brought in people from all over New England and other states on the eastern seaboard along with federal government, and participated in a full day of a communications exercise, which we deployed at Rensselaer Field, which was very successful, and it showed our teams how it can all work if we work together and follow that framework. And then in 2013, DAS, along with our sister agency, the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, we formed a cyber committee, and in that we brought in some of our NGOs and private area partners to discuss areas of cyber concern. So with that, we spend a lot of time, we do a lot of information sharing so that everybody could go back to their agencies or their companies to share that information and risks that are out there and present each month. The other thing that is important is after this happened, we have a very strong partnership with our Emergency Management and Homeland Security Division, and we participate with them in the Threat Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment, better known as THIRA. And they bring us in for every meeting, and we get to discuss it. And cyber is at the top of the list for risks, at least in the state of Connecticut. If you go through and use Homeland Security rating system, I'm sure that would probably be the case in many, if not all, states, that cyber risk is right there at the top of the list. So at this time, we have our statewide cyber response plan in draft, which will be part of the state response framework that we had referenced earlier. So with that, we will have an annex in that framework so that we can respond to the various events. So some final thoughts. We discussed how physical can become a cyber, and cyber could become a physical event rather quickly. We need to be prepared for that. It also could give us life safety issues if we're not able to deliver our government services. We provide IT services to all executive branch agencies, and if state police can't have the comms in place that they are required, it definitely can become a life safety issue very quick, so we need to make sure we are addressing that. And we need to exercise. That's the most important part is to exercise. Without a plan, you can't exercise, and without exercise, you can't refine your plan. Chris mentioned earlier that you can't plan for everything, but if you do have a plan in place, at least you have that framework, which will most likely cover almost any unexpected event that might arise.
So the communication part, one of the things, the Cybersecurity Committee is co-chaired by the State Homeland Security Advisor and by the State Chief Information Officer. The fact that there's a meeting at which you have state, federal, local, and private sector representation, the idea that there's a constant stream of communication in terms of the response framework and in terms of the constant working together, those relationships are pre-built, and based on that, it's easier to exercise any contingency planning that you have. And again, to that point, the idea that you don't have an exact plan for everything, that's too specific. But if you have the relationships in place, then at least most of the thought about how is this particular disruption event, whether it's caused by a breach or it's caused by a natural hazard, the idea of who is actually affected and who has tools to bring to bear to help fix the situation and return government services is better in place. And so that's, particularly in the last few storms over the last winter, that's been apparent. And the fact that the relationships are there has been a very strong contributor to helping that move forward for us here.
Very good. Well, thank you all very much for presenting on your specific cyber disruption planning initiatives. We're moving into questions right now, and we ask that everyone who has a question submit that to me. You could submit it to everyone as well. You got a choice, but send it via chat, and we'll cover as many questions as we can. So go ahead and type those in. In meantime, here's a few questions. Let me start with David and Sherry. Do you have a mechanism for bringing in data from citizens? In other words, relative particularly to a physical issue, a physical disruption, maybe it has to do with power, might even be related to weather. Do you have a way of bringing that data in so that it's on the radar and you're beginning to prepare for it?
Absolutely, Eric. On a day-to-day basis, we have a Web EOC application out there, so municipalities, our federal partners, the NGOs can report situational information, any incidents that might be happening, shelter information, all of that. When we do activate the Emergency Operations Center, and when a state of emergency is declared here, that is where in one of those flow diagrams, when we have to activate that, the governor is at the EOC with us. We have regional coordinators through DEMIS, our Emergency Management Homeland Security, and those coordinators have regions of the state that the municipalities know that they can contact the coordinators bring it up to the EOC. We also have 2 calls a day, one with state agencies first, all the agency heads, with the governor present. The second call, the governor is also present, and it's with the municipality heads and emergency management directors. And there is a constant flow of information, whether there is an event that is happening or whether there's important information that needs to be shared on a day-to-day basis that is in place.
Very good. Chris, how about state of Michigan? Do you have a way of bringing in data from citizens?
Yeah, we do. Citizens often will be able to call, they call the state sometimes when they need help. They call the MC3 or the MIOC, the state police area. So we do, and then we also have the same way of being able to tracking this information. We have a lot of the information. We haven't exactly been able to use it as well as we would like for some metrics and some measurements, but we do have that and we're collecting it.
Question for both of you. Let's start with you, Chris. What's the relationship to fusion centers and National Guard?
Gee, that's a great question. So I would look at it like we would bring in the National Guard at the highest level. So the Michigan State Police has its own fusion center, if you will, where information is brought into and then it's distributed to the locals and to those individuals who are needing to have that information. The fusion center would be the ones who would essentially call the National Guard when we were in a state of emergency and if we were going to need to request their help. And then I believe even in the National Guard, they would have their own fusion center as well.
How about Connecticut? Do you have fusion centers involved?
Absolutely. As part of the cyber committee we were talking about earlier, our fusion center has representatives there that present every month. The National Guard is also part of that team, and they have a couple of people that attend each of those meetings. When the EOC is activated, we're lucky that our EOC is actually located right in the Armory with the National Guard, and we do have National Guard members that are actually on our war room floor that help response. And then when it comes to the feds, we have MSISAC, of course, which reaches out and keeps us involved with the NCIC and at a national level.
Very good. And now here's another question. Relative to the kinds of data resources that you have to try to protect, do you have, in fact, an inventory of data resources, some information related to the value of those resources and how to protect them? Let's start with you, Chris. Do you have such an inventory that would help you distinguish between what assets need more protection versus others?
You know, we do. We actually, I guess you can take that a couple different ways. And for us, so we have a physical asset of buildings. We have certain buildings that are of higher priority because perhaps they might be a data center, or this is the area in where this operation is being taken care of, whether it's a bridge card system or a welfare issue. You know, we would evaluate the buildings of where the people are located that actually take care of that service. We also have at Michigan, we have, we call it our red card, but it's our emergency card. So critical applications are all listed out inside of our red card for all of the agencies. These ones are applications that if something did happen and the application would go down, they would take priority to make it sure that it came up. So certain things like for corrections, we would have things on there for, you know, where the prisoners were and what was happening there, and then also for Michigan State Police to make sure that we had their network and applications up and running much faster as well.
Okay, and for Connecticut.
How about Connecticut?
Sure. We have DAS BEST. It's a very long, Department of Administrative Services, Bureau of Enterprise Systems and Technology. What it really means is that we own the executive branch enterprise infrastructure. So we own the security boundary. We have the central data processing center, firewalls, databases, things like that. Individual agencies are responsible for classifying their data. We're stewards, and we are, in some ways, almost not quite as far as state agencies goes, almost a third-party service provider. So the state agencies and their compliance directives drive how their data is both classified and protected. Our role is to provide the level of service so that they can elect from various levels of protection to meet their compliance needs. The business continuity for each critical application, again, is driven by the individual agencies. So from the state police to revenue services to social services, each one of them have identified their critical applications, and then the support matrix for that gets racked and stacked at the statewide response level. So the critical core services get ranked there.
Okay. Okay. Let me move on to some other questions here. Do either of the presenting states have cyber liability policies? Chris, let's start with you.
So yes and no. We're in the process of reviewing some of the policies that we have as well. I guess to that part, we would be also trying to understand and look at understanding more about cybersecurity insurance. In fact, one of the presenters at the North American International Cyber Summit is going to present on that. So we're in the process of developing and making sure that we have some written up. So those are in the process.
Connecticut, how about you?
So at this time, Connecticut does not have any cybersecurity incident policy, liability policy in place. I think from the state perspective, we're self-insured.
Okay. Here's another question for Connecticut, and this has to do with declaration of an emergency. Would you need to have kinetic effects of a cyber disaster? Actually, the effects have happened. You're facing the effects before an emergency declaration or any type of declaration can be made? In other words, you can't anticipate, you got to wait for effects to actually take place before an emergency can be declared? And I think this is, for instance, there, you know, a storm is coming in offshore. When do you declare an emergency? Do you have to wait until the storm has come in, destroyed property, people are displaced? Or can you declare an emergency in advance of that so you're maybe better prepared?
Yeah, and from Connecticut, yes, we can declare a state of emergency before actual damage has been done as a level of preparation. I think, you know, for example, as far as, you know, shutting down roads and things like that during the blizzard that happened last year, and the same kind of issue. I think forewarning for cyber effects would be a bit, you know, a bit wishful thinking, but
yeah, okay.
And in fact,
Sure.
We don't have to wait for damage to occur to actually declare a state of emergency, and certainly standing up the response team starts to happen before an emergency is declared.
Mm-hmm. Chris, a question for you in Michigan. Prior to the declaration of a state emergency by the governor, what communication is happening with Federal Department of Homeland Security in a cyber emergency?
Good question. Well, early on, hopefully from my PowerPoint, you saw that there were certain levels of escalation in the process. During that time, we're already making sure that the governor's office, as well as the MIISAC and the federal level, is aware of what's going on. So if there's a significant DDoS attack that's attacking us, it's most likely, well, we've seen that they have most likely hit other states at the same time. So our communication is always continuing to go up the chain so that people are having a situational awareness of everything that's happening in Michigan, and making sure that the governor knows exactly what's happening so that when the time does come and he does have to declare an emergency, that we have already informed him of everything that's happening. And just to relate it back to the question that you asked just before, I think that because oftentimes what we hear about the cyber attack is either the after effects and how bad it was and who lost their jobs. So I think we're still working on developing how we can say, you know, it's already an emergency, although we haven't had anything happen. I think that it will slowly start to get there, but I think that's something that's just yet to be seen, and that it's coming soon.
Very good. Here's a question for Connecticut. For the statewide emergency response, and consider state, counties, cities, as well as companies, infrastructure, are there plans for a centralized incident response center that would be managed 24/7, specifically for monitoring cyber activities within Connecticut?
Hi, Eric. Yes, like our slide at the beginning said, it's all hazards response and planning. So that fits, you know, the umbrella over cyber and physical incidents. We follow the same plan. We stand up the EOC. We may partially activate it first before we do a full activation, and that is really the heart of the response for a statewide response to any kind of threat, whether it's physical or cyber.
And in that process, Sherry, when do you start interacting with emergency response? Is it really early when you're beginning to think, hey, this could be cyber as well as physical, or does it have to reach some level of some threat level before you begin collaborating?
That's a great question right now, because we are already collaborating because we have Joaquin out there. And it's a big unknown as to where it may hit on the eastern seaboard if it doesn't go out to sea. So we are already having conversations. Should we have to put together our response, there's plans in place, and immediately, as soon as we know something's happening, there is a response that starts, or communication that starts happening between our emergency management division and between agency heads.
I think, Eric, one key there is because the state enterprise IT infrastructure is so intertwined with all of the first responders, whether it be state police, local fire departments, or anything like that, that we come along, if those turn into cyber incidents or if there's a dedicated cyber incident, we're already part of the conversation right from the beginning, because any response, almost by its nature, requires the IT infrastructure to be there. We're all geared towards using the tools that we have in our infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Here's a question for Michigan. Just looking across the country, possibly in comparative, do you have some idea of the maturity of states in terms of developing their emergency contacts relative to crisis communications during a cyber incident or even a cyber disruption? How is that contact list changing over time? It could be, maybe it's a question of governance. How is that changing over time, and do you see that expanding into maybe some disciplines you're not currently using?
Oh, sure. I definitely think that is an issue. I think that one of the things that we're doing on our communications, or for our communications, is that we have certain individuals who are responsible to make sure that we have those lists up to date. We recently did an internal tabletop exercise, and during the exercise we talked about how everything was shut down, the network was down, and they said, well, who do we need to contact? Well, as a team, they said, well, I'll pick up my phone and call so-and-so. Well, then we reminded them that the network was completely down, cell phones were not going to be working, how would you call somebody? People actually didn't even have a telephone list with them. I, for one, rely on my phone heavily, so I wouldn't know somebody's telephone number if I didn't have it on my phone. So, once that happened, then what we did as an organization is we ended up purchasing the 800 megahertz radios so that if something does happen, and when it does, we can be able to make sure that those who need a radio will have a radio so that they'll have a means of communication. So I think it's making sure that those people have and are aware of their responsibility of when they need to be communicating and with whom, and then making sure that that's a clear communication line. Because hypothetically, let's say the Michigan State Police colonel decides to tell the governor about a cyber incident, and then the chief information officer for the state of Michigan also does the same. It could be different on the story that they're being told. So the continuing communication and consistency is going to be very important moving forward.
So relative to that communication list, is there or have you considered potentially developing formal contracts for handling communications during this kind of an event? It might be with a call center. So someone has responsibility for that, and it's a contracted for service.
Yeah, we have not considered that yet. Would we be willing to look into it? Sure. I think as the state right now, we feel we could handle that, but time will tell, and if it's something we need to do, then we'll look into doing that.
Very good. And how about Connecticut? Any thoughts along those same lines relative to contracted for communications capabilities?
Hi, Eric. Yes, Connecticut actually has a contract with a reverse 911 system. It's utilized by our municipalities as well as the state agencies. In that system, agencies are responsible for populating their contact information. It has a capability of sending emails, sending texts, sending messages to beepers, phone calls, so that we have many lines of communication covered with that. At a paperwork level, using NIMS before any incident, especially if we know something might be coming, we put together an incident action plan. And with the IAP, there is a form called a 205, which is actually a communications plan. And in that communications plan, it also has phone numbers of key people that are within each section for response, radio frequencies that various responders will be using, and those kind of things.
Very good. Well, I want to thank all of our speakers for presenting to us today. You did just a fabulous job. This information is extremely valuable. And I want to also thank all of the attendees and those that sent in questions. Thank you very much. I want to again remind you we've got reports that will be coming forth very soon. The CISO Toolkit, our reports on cyber disruption response planning guidance, and our upcoming 2015 annual CIO survey. So look for those reports, and stay tuned for more webinars on cybersecurity. Thank you so very much. Have a good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. Thank you.
The host has left